The thing that I love about cedar is when I see it on your house, I know I'm going to replace it.
Yeah, we do. We see cedar quite a bit in Colorado. We see it up in the mountains more, obviously, and cedar does well, I would say, in our dry climate. The place that it doesn't do well is on a south-facing wall where it gets a lot of sunlight. So cedar tends to dry rot. A lot of homes in the Colorado market, especially in the city, have a composite board siding on it, and that siding goes bad on the north wall first because the north wall gets all the moisture, and then it doesn't get any sunlight, so it stays wet. So it's like a cardboard that stays wet. And so, so many of our customers have those north wall issues, and we see that translate to the south wall when you have a cedar home. And the north wall on the cedar home is in really great shape, because it's gotten that moisture to keep it from dry rotting. It stayed out of the sun. But on that south wall, it's just baked, and it those grains, because you have the natural wood grains in a cedar lumber siding that just open up and expand, and then as soon as it gets some age, that expansion contraction through our spring and fall months, it just wreaks havoc on cedar. And so then, because it becomes brittle, then that invites woodpeckers, and then also, it becomes a tinderbox. And so that's a lot of the calls that we get for cedar siding. It will have to do with the south wall on a home, and there's not really a great way to go in and patch without it looking super patchy.
Yeah, and then one of the things you have to consider here along the Front Range is that we have so many fire zones, and these houses are, like you said, they could go up like a tinderbox. They're so susceptible. Those boards, older boards, over time will begin to what we call warp and cup. And so anywhere there's a seam or a board separation, it starts to split and separate, and that allows for moisture intrusion so that moisture can get behind, and that just sort of exacerbates the issue with dry rotting. But if you want to replace with cedar, it becomes cost prohibitive, right? So there's a big difference between what we call new wood and old wood. Old wood is a much denser, fortified wood. New wood gets harvested earlier. There are different grades of wood. The lower grades of wood, which are more affordable, have big knots in them. Those knots start to shrink and pop out, and now you have big holes in your board. And the new wood starts that warping and cupping process sooner. And then they just don't plane that wood in the same thicknesses anymore. The knobs there.
It's much thinner.
Yeah, it's much thinner. So it splits easier. And then it also requires much heavier duty maintenance now, right? So the maintenance cycle on old wood may be 7 to 10 years. That's what you were looking at some point. Now you're 3 to 5 years, 5 years being the max, and probably 2 to 3 years on a solid body stain or staining and sealing wood.
I have a home that was just built in our neighborhood a year ago, and it's got like a number 2 cedar, which number 2 would be not the select cedar, but it's got more knots in it, and that has already cupped and all the seams have split. And it drives me nuts that they're using this poor quality lumber on these homes, and these builders are going to walk away from those. Be done with them. It's unfortunate. What else about cedar? Cedar has a pretty high maintenance cycle, like we're talking about, and the staining of cedar is also very cost prohibitive. It's not only a more expensive process to care for cedar, but it's just you have to do it, like we were talking about, every 3 to 5 years.
That brings to mind a fact that we run into all the time, which is people paint their cedar, and they will paint it with like exterior acrylic latex paint, which is just terrible. You'll see it on decks, you'll see it on soffits and fascia, or even on full walls on the body of a house. And of course, you don't want to paint that. It needs to, if you want to have a colored board, you want that to be a solid stain and not a paint, because the paint actually, well, first of all, it doesn't adhere properly, and then
that's because oftentimes cedar originally had an oil-based stain on it.
Yeah.
And then if you go back with a water-based stain, well, we know that oil and water don't mix, and so that's going to give you constant problems as you go forward in the future.
So you're going to have flaking, you're going to have peeling,
Blisters.
and then you're going to have the blistering, and then those other finished products don't allow the board to breathe, and it needs to naturally breathe, right? You want, even stone brick needs to breathe, believe it or not. It's a porous material that needs to breathe properly to prevent that warping and cupping. And so it actually holds moisture in that gets trapped, and it starts to rot away those boards.
Which is a very good natural thing that it does, but because it's natural, you forgo any warranties.
Yeah.
So then, when you put up a natural lumber on your the side of your house, you forego having any kind of manufacturer's warranty.
Right.
So that's a big point to consider.
Yeah.